The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house. Alex left, slamming it so hard that the windows rattled. I stood in the middle of the living room, gripping an empty cup in my hands. He came over when no one else was home, hoping for some quiet and a chance to talk about us. But the conversation took a very different turn. "You want to live like we have millions, but I can't keep up." His voice rang with anger. "Lily, I'm tired of being your wallet." His words hit me like a slap. Inside, I felt a swirl of shame and hurt. I knew he was right, but I couldn't admit it. Instead, I shouted back, "I just want something better for both of us." He stayed silent, clenching his jaw as if holding back another burst of frustration. After a few moments, he grabbed his jacket and left, leaving me alone with the suffocating guilt. I stared at the empty cup in my hands, as if searching for answers to questions I couldn't even formulate. The familiar cracks in our relationship were growing deeper, and it scared me. Hating myself for crying, I went upstairs, trying not to think about our argument. I needed a break, time to collect myself. I pulled my best dress out of the closet, a dark blue one that hugged my figure, with a modest neckline. A few strokes of makeup revived my face, and a simple hairstyle gave me confidence. I called a cab and on the way to the restaurant tried to mentally push thoughts of Alex aside. The restaurant was bathed in soft candlelight. David was waiting for me at a corner table, leaning back in his chair. His gaze was warm, almost comforting. As I approached, he stood, helped me with my coat, and lightly touched my hand, as if we'd known each other forever. "You look stunning, Lily," he said, handing me a glass of champagne. In his company, I always felt special. David had a way with words that erased traces of my worries. We talked about everything. He shared stories of his travels, and I talked about the small details of my life. When he pulled out an exquisite necklace, I froze. "It highlights your beauty. Always wear it," he said with a gentle smile, holding it out to me. "You're too kind to me," I whispered, but he insisted. Eventually, I let him fasten the necklace around my neck. When his fingers lightly brushed my skin, I felt a strange warmth. The gesture was soft yet full of meaning. The night ended almost perfectly. David offered to drive me home, and I didn't hesitate to accept. His car stopped in front of our house. I thanked him, tilting my head slightly as we said goodbye. As I walked inside, I tried to compose myself, careful not to wake my parents. The house was quiet. I tried not to make any noise to avoid attention. I skipped dinner. I had no appetite. Adam, as usual, couldn't resist a comment. "What, are you living off air now?" I gave him a cold look and said I wasn't hungry, heading upstairs. Locking myself in my room, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, admiring the necklace. It sat perfectly on my neck, as if it was made for me. My gaze lingered on my reflection, and a smile formed on my face. I thought I had my secrets under control, but I didn't know that everything was about to change. The days at home passed as usual, but I started noticing that Adam, my older brother, was watching me differently. His sharp eyes lingered on me more often, as if he was trying to figure something out. He had always been strict and a bit sarcastic, but now his behavior left me uneasy. I tried to stay out of the common rooms, spending more time in my bedroom. Studying and plans with friends became my favorite excuses. The truth was, I needed space to sort through my thoughts. Adam, however, wasn't one to leave things unnoticed. "You're a star of the parties now, Lily," he remarked one evening as I came downstairs wearing a fitted dress I had put on just for myself. "The princess of the house? Always heading somewhere?" "Stop it, Adam," I replied, trying to keep calm. But inside, I felt a twinge of anxiety. His words carried a mocking tone, but there was more to them, as if he suspected something. The next day, I was getting ready to leave the house when I ran into Alex in the hallway. His eyes immediately landed on my new necklace. "And where's this from?" he asked sharply. For a moment, I hesitated but quickly found an answer. "A gift from a friend. I thought you'd like it." He gave me a skeptical look but said nothing. I knew he didn't believe me, but he wasn't the type to cause a scene right away. Alex always avoided conflicts when he could, but I knew his silence meant he'd be watching me even closer. Meanwhile, Adam wasn't letting up. He seemed casual, but I could feel him observing my every move. His jokes were becoming sharper. "Lily, are you sure you're just studying? Or is this for an audition in some new show?" he said once, watching me apply makeup in front of the mirror. "You've become too curious, Adam," I replied without looking away from my reflection. "Just making sure. Someone has to keep an eye on you since Alex clearly can't," he said, walking off to his room. His words stung. I snapped my makeup bag shut, feeling my face flush. Everything felt so fragile. My explanations, my attempts to hide the truth. But I tried not to let it show. The most important thing was to act as if nothing was wrong. Late that evening, when the house was finally quiet, I went up to my room. Adam was still awake. I could hear the floor creaking in his bedroom. I closed my door tightly and picked up my phone. "I'll join the call in a minute, my dear David. Just need to put on my most revealing outfit," I said with a smile, barely recognizing my own voice. I didn't notice someone standing outside my door. Adam had lingered near my room. His shadow passed under the door, but I was too engrossed to notice. He stood there listening to every word. His silence spoke volumes. He was waiting to find out what I was up to next. The house was steeped in nighttime silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. Adam sat in his room, but his thoughts wouldn't let him rest. The conversation he had overheard outside Lily's door earlier felt strange. Her tone, her words, her hints, none of it matched the sister he thought he knew. Unease gnawed at him, and eventually he got up. As he approached Lily's door, he noticed it was slightly ajar. The faint glow of her lamp spilled through the crack, along with the muffled sound of her voice. Adam stepped closer and peeked inside. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. Lily sat on her bed wearing a tight-fitting top and shorts that seemed almost intimate. She laughed softly, tilting her head toward her laptop screen. On the display was a man. David. Adam recognized him instantly. This man had hovered around her life before, but always on the sidelines. Now, however, he was staring at Lily with an intensity that felt almost predatory. "You look stunning, Lily," came the voice from the speakers. "That dress of yours would have been the perfect touch tonight." "You're right," she replied with a smile, swinging her leg casually. "But a dress needs company, not four walls." "Exactly. If you were here, I'd—" David trailed off, but his smile spoke volumes. Adam felt a surge of anger rising within him. He couldn't tear his eyes away from his sister, who laughed and flirted so effortlessly. Her movements, soft and relaxed, seemed far too natural. Then David said, "Show me the dress, Lily. I want to see all of you." Lily laughed nervously but stood up, taking a few steps back from the camera. She turned her back, pretending to examine herself in the mirror. The gesture seemed innocent, but it carried a subtle eagerness to please, a desire to be admired. David watched her like a predator ready to pounce. Adam froze. His hands balled into fists, but he made no sound. The scene unfolding before him was a shock. His sister, his Lily, was acting in a way he never could have imagined, and it outraged him to his core. After a few minutes, he silently stepped away from the door. Lily, engrossed in her conversation, hadn't noticed his presence. Adam returned to his room, feeling a storm of conflicting emotions brewing inside him. Jealousy and anger, mixed with an unexpected sense of power, filled him. He now held a secret that could upend their world. The next evening, Lily emerged from her room as if nothing had happened. She was calm as usual, but deep down, she felt a vague sense of unease. Adam was sitting in the living room, clearly waiting for her. His gaze was cold, sending a shiver down her spine. "Interesting choice of company," he said, staring directly into her eyes. Lily froze, her face paling. For a moment, she was speechless, but she quickly recovered and shrugged. "I don't know what you're talking about." His expression didn't change, but there was a glint of something icy in his eyes. He said nothing more, but she knew. Adam had seen something. Her heart pounded wildly, but she forced herself to keep walking, pretending everything was fine. The house was unusually quiet. My parents had gone out for the evening, and Alex was still at work. The solitude that usually brought relief now filled me with unease. In recent days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something intangible was changing, disrupting the familiar order of things. Adam found me in my bedroom. I heard his footsteps before he opened the door. He walked in with confidence, as if everything happening here was entirely under his control. His gaze was calm, yet there was a force behind it that made my body tense. I tried to appear nonchalant, continuing to fold clothes on the bed. "We need to talk," he said after a pause. His voice was low and steady, but it carried a chill that sent shivers down my spine. I felt a cold rush down my back. I tried not to show that I understood what he was referring to, but his piercing gaze held me in place. Adam began to speak, calmly and confidently, as though he already knew everything. He described the details: my revealing outfit, the man on the screen, my laughter. Each word felt like a challenge. I couldn't respond. Any semblance of confidence melted away as he recounted the evening with such precision that denying it was pointless. I stood there clutching a shirt in my hands as he continued his slow, deliberate monologue. When he finally stopped, I struggled to gather my thoughts. Panic surged through me, but I managed to whisper, "Please, Adam, don't tell Mom. Or Alex." My voice trembled, carrying a hint of desperation. Inside, everything quaked with the realization of my vulnerability. "Stay silent, that's possible," he said, taking a step closer. "But not for free." His words froze me. I didn't know what he wanted, but the sense of dread was growing. Adam stepped even closer, and I felt a strange warmth replacing the initial chill. He leaned toward me and quietly said, "Kiss me. That's the only way I'll forget." My heart pounded. It didn't make sense. It wasn't right. But inside, a strange sensation began to stir. It wasn't fear. It was something else. A mix of humiliation and submission that, to my surprise, brought a faint ripple of excitement. I knew I had no choice. Slowly, as if in a trance, I stepped closer and closed my eyes. His hands gently touched my shoulders for a brief moment, as if waiting for my consent. Then I felt his lips on mine. It wasn't just a kiss. It was strong, yet filled with calm assurance. I couldn't stop myself from responding. My fingers trembled as his closeness sent a wave of conflicting emotions through me. The kiss didn't last long, but it was enough to turn everything inside me upside down. When he pulled away, I was left in a haze. Adam looked at me with a faint smile, a hint of superiority in his expression. "Now we're even. For now. But I'll have another request," he said, leaving the room and closing the door behind him. I stood there for a long time, unable to move, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Inside, I felt something unfamiliar. Humiliation mingled with something warm, dangerous, but undeniably magnetic. The days began to blur into an endless string of tense moments. Adam found more and more reasons to talk to me, reasons that seemed designed solely to remind me of his control. His behavior had changed. Now, he exuded a calm confidence, as if he had everything under his command. He would enter my room under any pretense, to ask for advice or to find something he'd misplaced. But his gaze always carried a mocking undertone that made me uneasy. Each of his visits filled me with dread. I tried to avoid unnecessary interactions, but he seemed to sense when I most wanted to be left alone, and always appeared at those moments. His presence became a constant reminder that my life was now divided into before and after. My relationship with Alex grew more strained with each passing day. I couldn't act around him the way I used to. Touches that once felt natural and comforting now filled me with internal resistance. Every time he tried to hug or kiss me, I found an excuse to pull away. Alex noticed the change. His questions became more direct, but I deflected, claiming I was just tired or preoccupied with thoughts about the future. He tried to be patient, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. Our conversations grew shorter and more strained, and the warm closeness we once shared faded with every passing day. Rachel, Adam's girlfriend, began noticing the changes as well. She was sharp and observant, and it didn't escape her attention that Adam was spending more and more time at home, particularly in my room. Her gaze lingered on us whenever we crossed paths in the common areas. Though she said nothing, there was a tension in her demeanor. She seemed to be piecing together a puzzle that refused to fit. Late one evening, when the house was quiet, Adam found me again. I was sitting at my desk pretending to write notes. In reality, I was just trying to distract myself, but his arrival shattered my focus. "I have one more condition," he said, leaning casually against the doorframe. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but the threat beneath it was unmistakable. I turned to face him, trying to look indifferent, but inside I was trembling. The words caught in my throat. "This will be the last one," he continued, taking a step closer. "After that, I'll forget everything." I knew he was lying. His promises had long since lost their meaning to me. But I had no choice. Trapped in this situation, I couldn't see a way out. When the door closed behind him, I was left alone. The room felt suffocating, the air refusing to move. The weight of helplessness pressed on my chest, making it impossible to breathe fully. I realized this moment was another step toward completely losing control over my own life. The house was eerily quiet, the silence growing heavier with each passing minute. I sat in my room, flipping through the pages of a textbook, but my mind wandered. Alex was working late again, and my parents were still at their friend's house. I hoped I could spend this evening without another tense encounter with Adam. But fate seemed to have other plans. The door opened so quietly that I didn't notice his presence at first. Adam stood in the doorway, his figure framed by the light spilling in from the hallway. He entered slowly, as if testing my reaction. I straightened up, feeling a wave of tension ripple through my body. "I have a proposition for you," he began, his voice calmer than usual. I didn't respond, trying to read his intentions. His tone was almost friendly, but there was an undercurrent of authority I couldn't ignore. Adam moved closer, leaning on the back of my chair, deliberately closing the distance between us. "If you agree to this, I promise I'll never bring it up again. No more mentions of David, no more threats. It'll stay between us." I tried to understand exactly what he meant, but his gaze spoke volumes. My thoughts froze as he stepped back and added without breaking eye contact, "I want us to be closer. You know it'll stay just between us. No one will ever know." My heart skipped a beat. His words were so confident, as if everything had already been decided. I knew it was wrong, but conflicting emotions battled inside me. Fear mingled with curiosity I couldn't fully explain. The thought was terrifying, yet intriguing. "You can think about it," he said, noticing my hesitation. "But remember, everything about David is in my hands." Over the next few days, Alex noticed I was becoming even more distant. His attempts to talk to me ended in short replies that I used as shields. Evenings that were once warm and full of laughter turned into awkward silences. I saw the worry in his eyes, but I couldn't tell him the truth. One evening, he stopped me in the kitchen, placing his hands gently on my shoulders. "Lily, what's going on with you?" he asked. "We're like strangers now." I turned away to hide my emotions. The words were stuck in my throat. He couldn't know. It would destroy us both. Back in my room, I closed the door and sat on the edge of my bed. My thoughts returned to the conversation with Adam. His proposition was bold, but so was my reaction to it. Inside, emotions I couldn't name fought for attention. Fear of the consequences was overshadowed by a strange sense of anticipation. I realized his demands were growing bolder. Yet with each encounter, I noticed something within me I couldn't fully understand. Curiosity, a desire to experience something forbidden. It scared me, but it also stirred a dangerous interest. The door creaked softly and I looked up, but this time it was only the wind. I closed my eyes, feeling the swirl of mixed emotions pulsing in my chest. The evening ended, but I knew this was only a temporary calm before the next step, one I might not be able to refuse. The house was wrapped in the dim light of evening. All day, a strange sense of anticipation had been building inside me, growing stronger with every passing moment. When Adam walked into my room, I knew exactly why he was there. He didn't ask questions or try to pressure me. His gaze was calm, his movements deliberate. He stepped closer as though there had never been a barrier between us. "Are you ready?" His voice was quiet, without a hint of demand. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought he might hear it. I nodded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and an unfamiliar sense of curiosity rising within me. This wasn't just about fear or stopping his manipulations. A part of me wanted to experience this, to understand what would happen if I let go. Adam reached out, his hand brushing my shoulder lightly. The touch was unexpectedly warm, almost reassuring. I looked up to meet his gaze, and in that moment the rest of the world seemed to disappear. His lips met mine, soft but firm, pulling me into a space where nothing else mattered. I didn't expect to feel this. It wasn't just attraction, it was a strange sensation of trust, something I hadn't felt in a long time. My hands lifted of their own accord, reaching out to touch him. It was more than just physical closeness. It was something I couldn't put into words. For a moment, I allowed myself to forget why this was happening and simply be present. When it ended, Adam pulled back slightly. His gaze remained calm, but there was something else there, something I couldn't decipher. He ran a finger gently along my cheek and said quietly, "You don't need to be afraid anymore. This stays between us." The next day, it was hard to meet Alex's eyes. His touch, which had once felt natural and comforting, now filled me with confusion. When he tried to hug me in the kitchen, I nervously pulled away, mumbling something about being tired. His eyes searched mine with confusion and hurt, and I felt a sharp pang of guilt. "You're different," he finally said. "Something's going on, Lily." I just shrugged, avoiding his gaze. Inside, conflicting emotions raged. Guilt for Alex and a strange, lingering warmth from what had happened with Adam. Rachel was beginning to suspect something too. The next evening, she walked into the living room where Adam and I were talking. I was sitting on the couch when he leaned down to whisper something in my ear. His hand lingered on my shoulder just a moment too long. I pulled away nervously, but it was already too late. Rachel froze, as though trying to piece together what she had just witnessed. Her eyes met mine, and I couldn't hide my unease. She said nothing, but her expression clearly conveyed doubt. I knew she would now be watching every move I made. Later, when we were alone, Adam leaned in close, his voice barely audible. "The deal is done," he said with a faint smile. "For now." His words sounded like reassurance, but I knew this wasn't the end. A strange feeling lingered inside me, as though this story was only beginning to unfold. I watched him leave the room, unable to sort out my emotions, fear, intrigue, or something far more complicated. A few days had passed. I tried to avoid Adam, but his presence seemed to fill every corner of the house. Even when he wasn't around, I felt his gaze, heard his words replaying over and over in my mind. I wanted to believe that our agreement was over, that everything would return to normal. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't let it go so easily. Adam found me in the library. I had hidden there, hoping for some peace. But as always, he knew where to find me. His entrance was as casual as ever. He sat across from me, folding his hands on the table, and quietly said, "We're not done, Lily." Those words hit me like a blow. I put my book aside, trying not to show my emotions, but tension gripped me from within. "We agreed," I said, my voice barely steady. "I did what you wanted." Adam smiled. His smile was calm, but there was an assurance in it that took my breath away. "You did," he agreed. "But not completely. You know that, don't you?" I felt a wave of anger mixed with helplessness rise within me. I knew arguing with him was pointless. He began speaking again, and each of his words felt like a fine, unbreakable thread tightening around me. "Lily, I just want to be sure you're ready to keep our secret. It's in your best interest." His voice was soft, almost deceptively kind. "Everything we do stays just between us." Evenings were becoming increasingly tense. I tried to avoid moments when we might be alone, but it was getting harder. His manipulations grew subtler. He no longer demanded, he suggested, making me feel as if it were my choice. And every time I found myself in a position where refusal seemed impossible. Rachel started to notice the oddities. One evening, she walked into the living room where Adam and I were standing too close to each other. He leaned in to say something to me, and I instinctively pulled back, catching her gaze. Her eyes narrowed, and I realized she suspected something. In the days that followed, Rachel became more watchful. Her presence was palpable. She followed us with her eyes, as if trying to decipher what lay behind our glances and brief conversations. Each time I noticed her nearby, the tension in the air grew thicker. Late one night, when the house had fallen silent, Adam found me again. He entered my room without knocking, his face serious. I stood bracing myself for another conversation. "You know I'm still in control of this," he said calmly. "If you ever decide to tell someone, it'll only make things more complicated." His words sounded like a warning, but there was no threat in his tone. He spoke with the confidence of someone who knew he held all the power. I wanted to respond, but the words wouldn't come. His gaze said everything for him. When he left, I remained seated in the quiet. My head was full of thoughts, but none of them brought clarity. All I knew was that I was trapped in a situation with no visible escape. I sat at my desk pretending to read, though focusing was impossible. Over the past few days, the tension had only grown, and every minute of silence in the house felt deafening. When I heard the door open, I knew immediately who it was. Adam walked in with the same quiet confidence as always. He closed the door behind him and stopped a few steps away, his calm expression stirring a strange sensation within me, a mix of anxiety and anticipation. "Lily," he said with a faint smile, "I think we need to finish this. For real." I tried not to show any emotion, but his words sent a shiver through me. He stepped closer, his voice soft but insistent. "You know this will be the last time. After this, I'll keep my word." His tone wasn't threatening, but I knew refusal wasn't an option. I froze, feeling that familiar pull inside me. It wasn't fear, it was something more. Desire mixed with the allure of the forbidden drew me toward him like a magnet. "You know this stays between us," he continued, his voice gentle, almost soothing. My eyes met his. I couldn't resist anymore, not just because resistance was futile. A part of me wanted this, despite the complexity of our situation. As he stepped closer, I felt his breath, the warmth radiating from him. His hand slid gently to my waist, and in that moment, the rest of the world ceased to exist. The contact between us was passionate, almost daring. His movements were sure. He knew exactly what he was doing. I allowed myself to let go, to fully embrace the moment, feeling the forbidden transform into something I genuinely desired. The sound of footsteps on the stairs snapped me back to reality. Everything happened too quickly. The door burst open and Rachel stood in the doorway. Her eyes widened in shock, reflecting a mix of anger and disgust. I pulled away from Adam, trying to collect myself, but she had already seen everything. "What is going on here?" Her voice was cold, trembling with emotion. Adam took a step forward, attempting to explain, but Rachel raised her hand to stop him. "Don't touch me," she snapped, her face filled with fury. She turned and stormed out of the room, leaving us in deafening silence. I turned to Adam, but he was staring at the closed door with an unreadable expression, as if he already knew what to do next. I realized this story was only becoming more complicated and the consequences were yet to come. I didn't know Alex had already figured everything out. Rachel had told him the truth, and her words shattered the fragile shell I had worked so hard to maintain. That evening, he came home unexpectedly, and his face immediately gave away that something was wrong. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. He didn't say much, but his eyes spoke volumes. Anger, pain, disappointment, all of it was written on his face. When he entered the room, I knew it was over. Rachel's words had been too convincing, and even if I tried to deny it, it would have been pointless. I opened my mouth to explain, but the tears betrayed me before I could say a single word. At some point, I had to admit the truth. I couldn't hide it anymore. The words spilled out as if I were freeing myself from a heavy burden. Alex stood there, his gaze growing colder with every passing second. When I finished, he turned and left without saying a word, leaving behind an emptiness that echoed through my heart. The next day, Rachel did what I feared most. She talked to Jennifer. At first, my mother didn't believe her. Her face showed more shock than anger. But when Adam and I stood in front of her, everything became clear. Adam didn't deny it. His expression remained calm, even indifferent. That made her even angrier. I stayed silent. There was nothing I could say. All I could do was stand there and listen as Jennifer spoke about broken trust and what we had done to the family. Her words cut deep, but I knew I deserved every one of them. She looked at us as if we were strangers, and that hurt more than shouting or accusations. At the end of the conversation, she said Adam had to leave. Her voice was firm, and I knew she wouldn't change her mind. Adam nodded silently and began packing his things. I watched him, not knowing what to feel. When he walked out the door, he turned back, and his eyes met mine. His gaze was calm, as if he regretted nothing. His eyes seemed to say, "I did what I wanted, and I don't regret it." The door closed, and the house sank into oppressive silence. Everything was ruined. I stood still, feeling that silence fill every corner of my soul. The house felt empty and foreign. After Alex left and my mother stopped speaking to me, silence filled every room like a heavy fog. I was left alone with thoughts that only deepened my despair. Jennifer hadn't thrown me out, but her cold silence spoke louder than any words. She no longer considered me part of the family. I tried reaching out to David, but he didn't respond. His social media profile suddenly came to life. Pictures with a new girl, young and radiant, spoke louder than words ever could. Deep down, I knew it was over, but the pain of realizing I was no longer needed overwhelmed me. I was no longer interesting to him. With each passing day, the loneliness grew more unbearable. The house that once felt warm now felt like a prison. Each morning started with an overwhelming emptiness, and each night I fell asleep in tears that no longer brought relief. I didn't know where to go or who to turn to. My mother forced me to look for a job, telling me she would no longer cover my expenses. Her voice wasn't angry. It was firm and distant. I sent out resumes, attended interviews, but in the interviewer's eyes I saw the same thing. Distrust, a judging look, as if they knew more about me than they should. Day by day, I struggled with the feeling of complete worthlessness. Even memories of the past, when everything seemed so simple and clear, only brought bitterness. Adam packed his things and left without a word. I didn't see him leave, but I felt his absence. When I went downstairs, his room was empty. A half-drunk cup of coffee sat on the kitchen counter, and for some reason, that detail made me break down in tears. I didn't know what I felt. Relief that he was gone, or bitterness that I was now completely alone. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror in my room. My reflection felt foreign. Tired eyes, pale skin, lifeless hair. I barely recognized myself. I've lost everything, the thought crossed my mind. But that everything wasn't just people or things. It was me. My reflection stared back as if asking who I was now and where I was going, but I had no answer. I sank to the floor, feeling the cold seep through me. Tears I thought I'd run out of started flowing again. It wasn't just pain. It was the realization that I had destroyed everything that ever mattered. Getting a job turned out to be harder than I had imagined. At first, I sent out resumes hoping to find something respectable, but no one called back. Eventually, I settled for the first low-paying position I could find at a small cafe, where I spent my days on my feet. The work was exhausting and felt degrading. I washed dishes, cleaned tables, and served orders, all while enduring the condescending looks of customers. Every day ended with aching feet and a hollow feeling inside. Sometimes I would spot familiar faces walking past the cafe and tried to hide, not wanting them to see me in such a humiliating position. This was a new chapter in my life, one where I was nobody. My relationship with my mother had completely fallen apart. We barely spoke, and when we did cross paths in the house, it was only brief, cold exchanges that broke the silence. I tried to reach out to her, to start a conversation, but her eyes were always full of judgment. One evening, I mustered the courage to approach her, hoping to fix what had been broken between us. "Mom, I want to talk," I began, my voice trembling. Jennifer was silent for a long moment, as if debating whether it was worth responding. Finally, her cold, measured voice shattered the quiet. "Lily, I can't see you as a decent daughter anymore." Her words hit harder than I expected. They sounded like a final verdict. I couldn't reply. I just left the room silently, feeling everything inside me crumble. The problems with my mother weren't the only blow. My friends, who had once been my support system, were now avoiding me. At first, I didn't think much of their short messages or the lack of calls. But when my attempts to meet up were met with excuses and refusals, I realized everything had changed. I overheard one of them whispering at a cafe about how she'd heard things about my life. The rumors spread quickly, and I became an outcast even among those who used to call me a friend. Each day, I felt the walls closing in. My life had become isolation, where no one wanted to look my way. All I had left was my job and an empty house that no longer felt like home. Life around me continued moving forward, despite the broken relationships and pain left behind by everything that had happened. Rachel was the first to leave. She packed her things and left Adam without a long conversation. Before leaving, she took a moment to speak with Jennifer. "I did the right thing," she said confidently. "It wasn't about revenge. It was about doing what's best for everyone." Jennifer nodded, but her eyes remained cold. Rachel left, leaving a sense of finality behind her, and began a new life where there was no place for past memories. Adam moved to another city, leaving everything behind. His room was empty, and any trace of his presence had disappeared. No one knew where he had gone, but rumors spread that he had found a job and was trying to start over. Yet inside, Adam felt hollow. He had lost everything: family, friends, respect. He understood that all the destruction was a result of his own choices. But there was no way back. Every day he looked at himself in the mirror and saw a man who had once broken everything he loved. Alex seemed to vanish completely from my life. He stopped answering calls and messages. I knew he had blocked my number. Meeting him again was now impossible, and I felt the distance between us becoming permanent. To him, I was just a stranger, a memory he was working hard to erase. One evening, while tidying my room, I noticed something strange in the drawer of my desk. It was an envelope. There was no name on it, but I immediately recognized the handwriting. Adam. My hands trembled as I opened the note. On the white paper were just a few lines. "You were my forbidden desire. One I couldn't resist. Forgive me or hate me, but I'll never forget you." The words hit me like lightning. I couldn't understand what I felt: anger, pain, or a strange, bitter acceptance. The note lay in my hands as I stared at it, trying to process that this person was gone forever, leaving only scars behind. Night fell over the house, and I was left alone with my thoughts. Everything broken around me was the result of my own choices and mistakes. But Adam's words, etched on the paper, would stay with me forever. My life had become a series of monotonous days. I lived alone in a small rented room, barely able to afford it. My interactions with others had dwindled to nothing. Even at work, surrounded by colleagues, I felt like an outsider. Everyone around me moved forward with their lives, while mine seemed frozen in time. I tried to focus on studying and my new responsibilities, but each day felt like a repetition of the last, filling me with a quiet despair. My mental state kept deteriorating. Each morning I forced myself out of bed because I knew that if I didn't, I'd lose the only shred of structure left. Work, school, futile attempts to fill the void. It all felt like an endless cycle. One day I decided to take one last step. Summoning every bit of courage I had, I went to see my mother, hoping for a conversation. She greeted me coldly, her expression distant. I spent what felt like forever searching for the right words, trying to tell her I was sorry, that I wanted to make things right. "To me, you no longer exist," she said firmly, her voice devoid of hesitation. Those words delivered the final blow. I stared at her but no longer saw the mother who once cared for me. Her eyes held no warmth. I didn't respond. I simply turned and walked away. Everything that tied me to my past was now gone. I often thought about how things could have turned out differently, if I had made other choices, if I had stopped myself before it was too late. The thought that I had destroyed my own life haunted me, but alongside the guilt, there was anger. Anger at Adam, for how he used me, manipulated me, pushed me into decisions I now regretted. But this was my life, and I was left alone to live it. Late one evening, sitting in my room, I heard the sound of a message notification. My phone was on the table, and I immediately recognized the number. It was Adam. The message was short, just a few words. "I will always remember." My breath caught. Those words brought back memories I had tried to bury. I didn't reply. The phone rested in my hand as tears rolled down my cheeks. They weren't just tears of pain, but of realization that nothing could be undone. I closed my eyes, sinking into thoughts of the past, of how things could have been if I had chosen differently. But the past was gone, and it could never return.